chapter 11 gets us into genetics. Chapter 11 is kind of the basis introductory chapter for it, and the next couple of chapters will go a little bit more in depth. So genetics, what is genetics? Genetics is a scientific study of heredity. So heredity is based on this idea of inheritance. And when we think about inheritance, it's like, oh, some grandma left me some money or a house or that type of thing. But there's other things that are passed from person to person, basically parents to offspring. Think about meiosis and those genes that are being passed down. So this is the inheritance that we're talking about, the different genes and traits that are being passed down to one another. So this is a core concept for the next several chapters. Big guy in this is Gregor Mendel. So he was a priest and a scientist and often is called the father of genetics. He really started this off by doing some research involving pea plants. What had happened was he was working at this monastery and in the gardens and started getting curious about what was actually going on and how some plants were tall and other plants had different colored peas, and really started to take a look at that. So his research is all based on these pea plants and trying to understand why some looked the way they did. So Mendel's experiments were kind of two pieces. One, he looked at just crossing pea plants with themselves, and the others he looked at what happens when they fertilized with different pea plants. So this first one, he kind of had to go back and look at how do pea plants actually reproduce. So fertilization occurs when the sex cells unite. Think back to meiosis. You have the sperm and the egg, and we have the sex cells in a flower. What he did is he self-fertilized these, meaning that he pollinated a pea plant with itself. So therefore the offspring would be identical to it. So instead of getting the two different homologous chromosomes sharing, that didn't happen like it does in meiosis because you had the same. So maybe two mother genes, chromosomes were crossing. So this is basically like cloning. If we look at this, this is called true breeding. And this is self-fertilization where you get these almost clones of one parent. This is something that we also often call like a purebred or also a pure strain, meaning as identical as possible. These plants have all of the same alleles for a trait. So I'm going to skip ahead for a minute and explain what a trait is. This is on your next slide, but a trait is a specific characteristic like seed color, plant height that varies from one individual to another. We talk about hair color, eye color. Those are different traits. They're different characteristics that we can have. Now, an allele for a trait is basically the different form of that. This is going to be one allele from your mom, possibly one for your dad. So in the case of true breeding, those are both coming from the same parent. So if the plant was tall, you'd end up with two tall alleles, and they're capital T's for that. And maybe if the plant was short, when it reproduced, it would have two short alleles. So true breeding focuses on this self-fertilization. So we're not getting that typical meiosis where you get one from the mom and one from the dad. It's from the same plant. So he took a look at what happened with that. Then he decided to look at what about if we pollinate them with others? What happens to these characteristics? Now, following good scientific method, he did not allow random fertilization to occur. He wanted to control that. So he went into actually pollinating different plants. So we're going to look here at this little kind of... All right, so I'm just going to move this a little bit so we can see this. So what happened was he has this immature flower from the plant. So he looked at the stamen, which is the male part, and the pistil, which is the female part. And so what happens is those kind of pollinate with one another. But what he did instead was cut off those stamens so the flower couldn't pollinate itself, and it couldn't get pollination from other individuals. So what he did then was to actually cross-pollinate himself. So he took a little brush, got the pollen from a different flower, and crossed it with this one. So that's what he did in the second part of this experiment, is he looked at, let me fix my window here. He looked at cross-pollinating and then recording those specific traits. So Mendel's traits, the ones that he was observing and kind of watching for, was the seed shape and color, the pod shape and color, the flower position, and the plant height. So I'm going to try and pull this up a little bit. Kind of hard to see on here, but he looked at the different seed color. We have yellow and green, the shape, whether or not it was wrinkled, whether or not we had this shape on the pod color, the length, flower, all this different things. So he had a lot of different things that he was trying to kind of look at and see what would happen when he crossed different ones together. So Mendel would cross two parental plants, which he called the P. So P for the parent generation. And the offspring were called the F1 generation. And just a side note, F stands for filius or filia, which are Latin for son or daughter. So this is where these F comes from. And then these offspring in the F1 generation normally had different traits among them and are what we would call hybrids. So when you're combining two different plants with different traits, they're called hybrids. And again, an example for this is maybe they're getting one tall allele and one short allele based on the parentage of the plant. So this section really gave you an idea of his actual experiment. In the next section, or in the next video notes, we'll actually look at what did he get for results and what did he notice. So the main piece for the first part of chapter 11 is Gregor Mendel did lots of experiments dealing with pea plants that are going to help us answer some of these questions about inheritance and genetics.